This meeting of the Laconia City Council is scheduled for February 25, 2019. As always, we will begin our meeting tonight with a salute to our American flag. I would ask that you please rise and join Councilor Henry Lippman in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll note for the record that the minutes to tonight's meeting are being kept by City Clerk Cheryl Hebert, and I would ask that she please call the roll.
Councilor Cheney?
Here.
Councilor Bounds?
Councilor Bounds is absent tonight.
Councilor Whitman?
Present?
Councilor Haynes?
Here.
Councilor Hamel?
Present.
Councilor Hosmer?
Councilor Hosmer is absent this evening.
Mayor Angley?
I am here. And we'll note for the record that 4 of the 6 councilors are present tonight, and a quorum has been established for this meeting. Also note for the record that the council is joined at the front table tonight by City Manager Scott Myers and by our Finance Director Glenn Smith. First order of business is acceptance of minutes from previous meetings. Gentlemen, you have 2 sets of minutes tonight, both relating to February 11th. One was the special meeting we had about the Colonial Theater prior to our regular meeting, and then our regular meeting minutes. As far as the special meeting minutes are concerned, they were distributed to the council on Wednesday, February 13th, and no changes or corrections have been suggested to date, and the minutes to the regular meeting were submitted on that to the council for review on that same date, February 13th. And again, no corrections or changes have been submitted to date. So unless there are any at this hour, I'm going to declare that the minutes to both the special meeting and the regular meeting of February 11, 2019 are accepted as submitted by the clerk. Presentations. Our primary order of business tonight is a presentation of the year-end comprehensive annual financial report by our auditors, Melanson Heath and Mr. Pat Mohan and Mr. Scott McIntyre with us tonight, and I believe Mr. Mohan is going to make the presentation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Welcome, sir. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Thank you very much for inviting us in tonight. My name is Pat Mohan. I'm a manager with Melanson Heath. Scott McIntyre is here this evening. He's the principal in charge of the audit. Tonight I'm going to be doing the talking and going over the financial highlights of this year's audit, and then be able to answer any questions as we're going along. So as we're going through the document, if you have questions, if we can go over them right then and there, we'll move ahead. Certainly this is a very large document. There's a lot of work that goes into it. Melanson Heath assists the city in compiling the numbers. And overall, it was somewhat of a complicated year, but I think, we were able to get through it. And part of what I usually like to start with is the foundation of the audit, because while I'm going to be going over the highlights, part of the audit procedure is not only to give an opinion on on the city's financial statements, but it's also to test the internal controls. That way there is reliance upon these numbers. That includes going through testing your payroll, testing your accounts payable, looking at your journal entries, looking at reconciliations and all of the introductory pieces to the information that gets into the system to begin with. And overall, we did not find any significant issues with any of that testing. We certainly then get to the larger testing, which is looking at the supporting documents to the very numbers we're going to talk about. But overall, the internal controls of the city were very sound. So, again, part of the reason that you bring us in is to offer an opinion on your financial statements. And once again, very consistent to all the other years, we didn't have any modifications to the audit opinion. We consider the city's financial statements in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles, and we've issued a clean opinion, which is the best opinion that you can get. So, again, we're going to go to page 13, which is after the Roman numerals. It's the statement of net position.
Receiving.
the statement of net position, there's 3 columns here. We're going to focus in on the governmental activities, which is your general fund, your capital reserves, your special revenues. And it's really the long-term perspective, meaning that it's your long-term assets, which are your capital assets, your receivables, and then also your long-term liabilities. And for the most part, the city's fairly consistent with other prior years. But there's a couple numbers that I would like to bring your attention to. 2/3 of the way down the page in the governmental activities, you have your net pension liability. Net pension liability has been there for a number of years now. That's the amount of the liability that the state passes down to the city in regards to the unfunded pension. That is trending downwards. That's based on the discount rate being the same. There's certainly a number of assumptions that go into that which could impact that down the line. There are extensive footnotes that go into that and help to explain what would happen if the discount rate goes up or down. But for the most part, that net pension liability is decreasing, and it's on a funding schedule. The net number just below it, though, the net OPUB liability, which is $12.9 million, that is new to the city. And there's 2 key components to that. There's the New Hampshire retirement system piece and then the city's piece. The city's always been in compliance with Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement 45, which was other post-employment benefits. This year, the city was required, just like everyone else, to implement the new Standard 75, which instead of recognizing that liability on an incremental, you now have to recognize it in totality. It differs than a lot of your other liabilities in that there's really no cash payment towards it. This liability is recognized as a overall actuarial number because what is happening is that the city is implicitly subsidizing the retirees. The retirees are allowed to be on the city's plan. Part of that would be that while the city does pay a portion of the actives, the retirees are paying their 100%. The fact that the retirees are able to and are required, have the ability to be in that same pool means that in theory the cost is increased. If those retirees weren't in the pool, the idea would be that the city's insurance would probably be a little bit cheaper. Thereby, this number is, again, more recognized as an implicit, and it's not something that the city's going to be able to pay down, and it's going to be there. Yes.
So the liability that's calculated here at 12 million is not a one-year charge. It's looking out to the future.
It is looking out to the future. It's going to be updated annually, and it does have 2 pieces. It has what we would consider the city or the local piece, and that's the being done just like it has been in the past. You have an actuary that comes in and determines it, and for a number of years you were working towards a number. It might not have been this large, but you were marching towards a number. In addition to that, there's now the New Hampshire retirement system piece. Much like the pension, there's a smaller piece of the medical trust that is unfunded, much smaller. The breakdown of that would be that the local piece was 8.7 and the New Hampshire retirement system was 4.6. The 4.6 is very similar to the pension where it's being passed down to you. They have actuaries, they're audited. The numbers in best practice schedules in the city is required to report that amount. But yes, it's not going to go away. But the city does continue to do what it's normally done, meaning pay as you go as far as your insurance costs. This liability, while it's large, it's not going to go away. The credit rating agencies are aware of it, and they have been aware of it. So it's now being presented on the balance sheet, and it's going to be updated annually. It has a lot of the same disclosure required. It says the, the pension. So there's a lot of information surrounding it. So it does have a 1-to-1 impact, though, on your unrestricted net position because there's no offsetting asset. So you've just added a $13 million liability, and where is that going to, the impact to that is your unrestricted. So
The liability was previously there, just not recorded because it wasn't an accounting principle at the time.
It was much smaller. The previous liability was $1.3 million, so.
Right, but the point I'm making is, it's not, if the principle was applied years earlier, it would be a liability like this.
Yes, very much so.
If I could just add one more thing to that. The key component that Pat said is this roughly the 8 million is the city liability, but we pay as you go for our health insurance, and the reason it's shown as a liability again is because state law requires that all municipalities allow retirees to stay on your health plan if you want, and because the retirees are typically older, they're raising our group census age and therefore causing the rates to be a little higher because we're insuring a fair number of older people who are paying 100%. The retirees pay 100%. So where that $8 million number factored out many years comes from is the added cost of the insurance by having a number of older folks included in our plan. So we do pay as you go. That's not something on that piece that is going to come home to roost someday. We're paying as we go, but we are recognizing it under current accounting standards that it is another post-employment benefit because the retirees do cause our insurance rates to go up.
Would agree.
Go ahead. Not purposefully, though.
Just because.
Certainly overall, seeing negative unrestricted, can be alarming, but I would say that, across the state, between the net pension liability being recorded and now the OPEB liability recorded, the city of Laconia is not by itself as far as, being in a negative. As far as the unrestricted, when we look at the total net position, it's a positive number. So again, I would say that, this first year of implementing, going to look to next year to really be able to see how the city as a whole would be doing, on that total net position number, because this is the first year of implementation. Certainly, over time, that number has been fairly close. Over the last 3 years, it was at a total net position of 37 million, 39 million. And then, like I said, adding a $12 million liability has to come from somewhere. So over time, I think that is going to be somewhat of your new norm as far as looking at that and then being able to determine how the city as a whole is doing. So that being said, if we can go to page 15. Page 15 is a lot more familiar looking. It's the governmental funds balance sheet. There's 3 columns presented. There's the general fund, the non-major, and the total. Our focus is going to be on the general fund. Your non-major is your special revenue funds, your capital projects, and permanent trust funds, none of which reached the level of needing to be recorded as a major fund. So they are grouped into one column and aggregately reported. Our focus is going to be on the general fund. There's a couple key figures when we're looking at the property tax number of $5.7 million as an outstanding receivable. That's fairly consistent with the prior year. There's a change that has to do with the timing of the bills and such, but overall, it's consistent. Our focus is down in the fund balance area. There's additional footnotes on page 46, but essentially the non-spendable amount is an offset to your prepaid assets. Your committed number of 2.3, that's your capital reserves. Your assigned balance is 1.9 million, slightly above last year's, which was 1.2 as far as encumbrances go. And then the unassigned number of $3.3 million. Now that did go down, and there's a few different reasons for that number going down. One of which was the recognizing of the Colonial Theater. That money had been certainly appropriated, discussed a few years ago. It was presented as a receivable, but it had never really been recorded against the unassigned fund balance. It certainly was obligated and the money had left. But due to the timing of things, it was discussed last year and certainly discussed this year that it was more appropriately to report that as a reduction of the unassigned fund balance because the receivable had gone on for more than a year. And certainly there's, lots of discussions along with that, so I don't need to go into that. But that is one of the primary reasons that the unassigned fund balance did dip. That being said, if we can turn a couple pages to page 19. Page 19 is the budget versus actual. Now, the excuse me, the far right-hand corner, the variance with the final budget, if we look at the revenues surpassed the budget by $150,000. The expenditures, there was a turnback of $1.2 million, and then when we look at the very final number, it was $825,000. So that was also using $835,000 worth of fund balance to reduce the tax rate. So overall, the city would have been plus $825,000 overall as far as the fund balance. The $1.4 million isn't recognized here because that was done in prior years. So this budget versus actual is really looking at the budgeted expenditures for this year versus the budget. So overall, the city had a positive year, although the fund balance went down. And the primary reason for that was the recognizing the $1.4 million as a reduction this year. So
what was our actual cash surplus for the audited year?
it would be that final number, more so the $825,000. So your revenues surpassed the budget and you had an expenditure turnback. There was a couple key pieces in there, meaning that if we look at the miscellaneous revenue, it was under, but that had to deal with the Lakeport building and the timing of the sale of that. And that's also offset, though, with the general government turnback of $1.2 million, where the contingency funds weren't used this year, but they're going to be used in 2019. So there was a couple key pieces that were offsetting. But overall, your motor vehicle monies were up this year, more so than prior years. And then you also had a number of departments having turnbacks, primarily because of salaries and other payroll-related items that were not used in the current year. So overall, the city would have had projected an $825,000 surplus to the fund balance.
Can you go back to page 18, the bottom line on that? Just adjust that for a minute.
Page 18?
Yes,
18,
18, yep.
okay.
Just the change in net position was positive on, can you discuss that line for a moment?
The positive 147,410.
Yep.
Excuse me, that's presented on the accrual basis. So the positive there is going to recognize the fact that the city was able to capitalize approximately $3.3 million worth of expenditures this year. So it was in addition to your fixed assets. Then there was a depreciation cost that the city needs to recognize of $6.1 million, which was far larger than what your actual cash payments for bonds payable. So there's a difference of reporting here versus, say, on your regular fund basis. And then there's certainly the other effect is the internal service fund. The internal service fund is presented with the proprietary funds. But when you get to the governmental activities, that's treated differently. It now becomes part of the overall governmental activities. And that does include the operating results for that, which was a shortfall, as it's seen here. So, which meant that certain departments, it's based on some calculations as far as usage and things like that. So the internal service fund was recognized as a shortfall in this column. But overall, there was, and this would also recognize the, excuse me, pension costs and other post-employment benefits costs as well. So overall, there was a positive.
Yep, all things considered.
All things considered, there's a lot of things happening in that number that are not the typical.
Net positive.
Yes, net positive. Excuse me. So, as we look at the budget versus actual results, one thing that the rating agencies like to look at are what are the consistencies of the city? How do they do over a period of time? So, as I was saying, that there was a positive $825,000 turnback. In comparison, the prior year number was $648,000. The year before that, $925,000, and the year before that, $601,000. So overall, the city has had positive turnbacks. And in all of those years, the city's also used fund balance to reduce the tax rate, meaning that anytime you use fund balance, you're essentially budgeting for a deficit because that means no new monies are coming in. So the idea then would be to, you're using that money, you're hoping to make up that money in those turnbacks. So overall, using 835,000 and you're recouping 825, you're almost at a break even. So overall, would say that, this is also, I'd like to tell people, it's kind of the report card of the city. How did you do with your budget? Overall, you did well. So really, if we can turn the page to water and sewer, I don't have a lot to say on that.
Page what?
Page 20, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Page 20 is the water, the sewer, and then also the internal service funds. These are presented on the accrual basis, very much like the statement of net position, so your fixed assets, your long-term liabilities, bonds payable are reported here. And overall, you do have to recognize that depreciation is also a major component of these changes versus your bonds payable, especially when you consider that the water fund is the only one with the outstanding bonds payable. Sewer isn't, but sewer is recognizing, certainly a large number for depreciation. From a budget versus actual, when you look at the user fees and the budgeted expenditures, that aren't shown here because that's the way the enterprise funds are reported. But they both had positive years. They were both above break even, not super, but both had positive results as far as where they stood from a budgetary basis. So, again, don't have a lot to talk on here. And then finally, if you can just go to page 23. Page 23, it's part of your financial statements. This is the fiduciary funds. It has to deal with your private purpose trust funds and also your agency funds. And what those represent are in the private purpose trust funds, certainly the scholarship funds that are reported by the trustees on the MS-9. They're held by the school. And then also certain trust funds that are applicable to the city. And then your agency funds or your student activity funds. Again, they're required to be reported in here. Overall, the numbers are consistent, and they're also part of the audit as well. And those are really the key highlights, of the document. Again, it's a large document. We could go on for a couple of hours, but those are the...
Please do.
You'll be all alone, but go ahead.
That's what I figured.
Questions for Mr. Mullen? Any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I think it's also be good to look at, I'm trying to find the chart here, of our percent of debt as a percent of operating budget. It's coming up on, yeah, it's on page 80. You can see that in 2018, as a percent of our general fund expenditures, we're at 6.9%. Before a decade ago, almost, we were at 8%. So even though we've undertaken a number of projects, we've been able to keep our debt at a pretty good level relative to the total expenditures. And the chart below that is worth looking at.
Ms. Myers?
I'd like to turn your attention to page 11. It's just another way to look at the fund balance and where we are on the unassigned and the total. And this is a good snapshot of how it reflects the Colonial Theater beyond where we were on page 18 as well. But you can see right toward the top in the columns, last year's unassigned fund balance was the 4.5 million. If we backed out the 1.4 million we're recognizing for the Colonial, that says we should be at, the 3.1 million. So we've actually added a little bit to unassigned fund balance due to some of the timing issues. Right below that, you can see the 835,000 that we did use out of fund balance last year to reduce taxes, and you can see the expenditures less than budget. I certainly want to recognize all departments who really work hard on a year-round basis and try to make excellent financial decisions, and dollars aren't used if there's change in staff, and knowing that we try to return some money back into the fund balance. So kudos to our department heads, your department heads. They do a great job managing the budget on a year-round basis. I also want to thank Pat and Scott and their team. As you know, we had a challenging year because of the passing of Donna. So Donna passed in mid-September, just starting to pull some of the audit information together. Pam jumped in and took charge and had worked with Pat before, so that was a positive. And Pat had worked on our audit in the past. He had been away for a couple of years, but came back as the lead this year, which turned out to be a positive. And Glenn coming in at the end and helping to tie out the numbers. And Glenn actually worked with Melanson Heath and Pat in particular during his time in Northfield. So really was a team effort, but I know that we threw a lot at Pat. They helped us tremendously, and very appreciative of their above and beyond efforts this year in helping pull this together. So Glenn knows next year it's all his. So anyway, so thank you.
Thank you again for inviting us in. It's always a pleasure to go through the highlights and have that level of interest from the management.
Thank you. Appreciate you both being here tonight. Next, we are to citizens' comments. This is the place on our agenda tonight where we welcome any comments having to do with matters not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone who wishes to address the council tonight on a matter that is not on tonight's agenda? No? Okay. Nominations, appointments, and elections. We have a number tonight. Follow up on the interviews we did 2 weeks ago. Starting with the Putnam Fund, we have Linda Perry seeking reappointment as a regular member of the Putnam Fund for a 5-year term expiring at the end of March 2024. A motion be in order to make that appointment. Councilor Hamel makes that motion, seconded by Councilor Lippman. Any discussion? All those in favor of appointing Linda Perry, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Still on the library front, Aaron Bassett is seeking reappointment as a regular member of the Library Board of Trustees for a 3-year term expiring at the end of March 2022. Someone care to move to reappoint Aaron Bassett? Councilor Hamel makes that motion. Councilor Lippman seconds the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor of appointing Aaron Bassett, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. And 2 more on the library front. Next up, John Moriarty. John Moriarty is seeking reappointment as a regular member of the Library Board of Trustees, also for a 3-year term expiring in 2022. Motion be in order to reappoint Mr. Moriarty to the Library Board. Councilor Haynes makes that a motion. Councilor Hamel seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, and Mr. Moriarty is unanimously reappointed to the Library Board. And finally, on the Library Board front, Bruce Kneuer is currently seeking reappointment as an alternate member of the Library Board of Trustees for a 1-year term expiring in 2020. Would someone care to move that appointment, please? Councilor Lippman does. Councilor Hamel seconds the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor of reappointing Bruce Kneuer, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion also passes unanimously. Next up, we are on to the trustees of the trust funds, and Peggy Selig is seeking reappointment as a regular member for a 3-year term expiring in 2022. Would someone care to make a motion? I'll let Councilor Cheney makes that motion, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor of reappointing Peggy Selig to the trustee of the trust funds, please raise a hand. We have 4 votes yes. That motion passes unanimously. Dorothy Duffy is seeking reappointment as a regular member of the Heritage Commission for a 3-year term expiring at the end of March 2022. Motion be in order to reappoint Dorothy Duffy, made by Councilor Hamel, seconded by Councilor Cheney. Any discussion?
Are you voting or
Yes, I'm
discussing?
voting.
You're voting. Okay. You tripped us up there, man.
Sorry about
I
that.
thought, wow, this is going to be unusual. All right, all those in favor of reappointing Dorothy Duffy to the Heritage Commission, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. And next up is Ryan Cardella. Mr. Cardella is seeking appointment as a regular member of the Weirs TIF District Advisory Board for a 3-year term expiring in June 2022. Would anyone care to please make a motion to appoint Mr. Cardella? Counselor Cheney does. Is there a second? Counselor Haynes seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously as well. On to the Parks and Recreation Commission, where Rodney Roy is seeking reappointment as a regular member of the commission for a 3-year term expiring March 2022. Counselor Hamel moves to reappoint Rodney Roy, seconded by Counselor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor of appointing Rodney Roy, please raise a hand. We have 4 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries unanimously. And finally, also on the Parks and Rec front, Arthur Kirk is seeking reappointment for a 3-year term expiring in March 2022. Counselor Hamel makes a motion to reappoint Mr. Kirk, seconded by Counselor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor of that reappointment, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries as well. Next up, we are dealing with the Lakes Region Planning Commission. 3 appointments to be made. One is the appointment of Peter Brunette as the Planning Board's representative to the Lakes Region Planning Commission to fill the term remaining from Dean Treflin, which expires at the end of June 2021. I'm assuming Mr. Treflin was filling in.
At the time, we had challenges getting planning board members to take on an extra committee assignment, so staff were filling those, and it's preferable if they're
Right.
planning board
So
members.
that's why the transfer here. So this, Peter, of course, is the chairman of the planning board, and he has agreed to be our planning board representative on the Lakes Region Planning Commission. And Counselor Hamel makes a motion to appoint Peter Burnett as the planning board's representative on the Lakes Region Planning Commission to fill the remaining term of Dean Treflin expiring at the end of June 2021. That motion is seconded by Counselor Lippman. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion passes unanimously, and we thank Mr. Brunette for coming forward and volunteering to take that position. Next up, Rob Mora. Rob's with us tonight, I believe. There he is. The Assistant Planning Director is, motion is in order to appoint him as a Commissioner of the Lakes Region Planning Commission to fill the remaining term of his predecessor, Brandy Laughlin, that term expiring at the end of June 2021. Counselor Hamel makes that motion, seconded by Counselor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor of appointing Rob Mora, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. And last on the appointment front, we need to reappoint Krista Larson to a 3-year term on the Lakes Region Planning Commission Transportation Advisory Committee, expiring in March 2022. Krista Larson is not the Assistant Planning Director.
Public Works.
She is the
Public Works.
Assistant Public Works Director.
She wears a couple of hats for us now.
That you didn't know about, right?
All right, we all know Krista as the Assistant Director of the Public Works Department. Someone care to make a motion to appoint her to the Regional Transportation Advisory Committee, please? Counselor Haynes makes that motion. Counselor Lippman seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative. And that appointment passes unanimously. Okay, public hearing is next. Call your attention to page 30 in your packet. This is a public hearing regarding resolution number 2 relative to the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Exotic Aquatic Plant Grant. I did pretty good on that this week.
Say it 3 times fast.
In the amount of $14,618. Notice that this public hearing was made available in the February 13, 2019 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, at the Public Library, the Community Center, and at the SAU office. Action on this item will be taken up tonight later under unfinished business. So is there anyone in the audience tonight who wishes to address the council? First of all, I should say, I'll open the public hearing at 7:34 p.m. and ask if there's anyone with us tonight who would wish to address the council on the adoption of Resolution 2 relative to accepting a exotic aquatic plant grant in the amount of $14,000 and some change. No one? I'm really shocked. All right, so I'm going to close the public hearing at 7:35 and remind everyone that we'll take this up again tonight under unfinished business. Mayor's report. I know the city council is aware of this, but for the sake of our audience, both in person tonight and watching on television, we had previously announced that we would be voting tonight on a couple of resolutions relative to funding for the Colonial Theater project. And as you all, as council members have been informed and has been reported in the newspaper, we are postponing that vote 2 weeks to March 11th at the request of Councilor Hosmer, who could not be here tonight. So nothing sinister about that proposal. Councilor Hosmer simply wanted to be present to be able to vote on that. And so there's no rush because we have received word that because of the governmental shutdown in January, which affected the Treasury Department, that the Treasury Department Bureau, whatever it is, subdivision that's in charge of of the New Market Tax Credits program, those people were not working during January, and that has delayed the allocation process. And we are now being told through Senator Shaheen's office, that they expect those allocation announcements to be made around mid-April. So that's a delay of about 6 weeks probably from what we had expected to happen. Okay, so the council will take this matter up again under unfinished business on March 11th. Hopefully we'll all be there. Okay, a couple of a thank you or congratulations in order tonight. Doubling down on what the city manager said a few minutes ago, on behalf of the council, I want to extend our warmest thanks and appreciation to Pam Reynolds, who was the finance director for the city, as you all remember, for 7 years, back in the first decade of this century. And with the tragic death of Donna Woodman that left us in a lurch there, she came back and filled in and stayed with us for a while. And we're deeply, deeply appreciative of everything. And I'm sure Glenn would be the first one to absolutely to thank her for that, for her contribution to seeing us through the past 4 or 5 months. So thank you, Donna, or thank you, I'm sorry, Pam, and good luck on the golf course. And please keep in touch with all of us. We deeply appreciate what you did. Congratulations are in order to city resident Steve Tucker on his appointment as the new superintendent of schools to take effect the 1st of July of next year. I think a lot of people, that was a very popular choice made by the selection committee and ratified by the school board. I'll note for the record that our city manager was on that selection committee and so played a hand in selecting Mr. Tucker as the new superintendent of schools. And I think the city is very excited about the prospect of having him in the leadership position. And so we look forward to not only a good relationship between the city council and the SAU, but also a good personal relationship between all of us and Steve Tucker. And finally, I wanted to extend our best wishes to Elida Millam. Elida is now a resident of the city of Laconia, which I am very proud of, and I'm sure that you all are too. She is I guess if we're going to line up people who are truly pillars of the community and have been for a long period of time, Elida would certainly be on any list that was drawn up for this area. She was the executive director of the VNA Hospice organization for many years. She represented Guilford ably in the state legislature for many years when she lived in that town. She was chairman of the Belknap County legislative delegation for a number of years and has contributed in any number of ways to the general well-being of our community. And unfortunately, Elida last week suffered a significant stroke And she is recovering now, and I'm told doing reasonably well, facing rehabilitation and whatnot. So on behalf of everyone at this table, I extend our best wishes and thoughts for good get well to Elida. And we hope to see her back here in her home city as soon as possible. And that's all I have tonight. Committee reports. Anyone have a committee report tonight? How about liaison reports? In the absence of Counselor Bounds tonight, I will report that the zoning task force met last week, that Counselor Lippman and I and Counselor Bounds are members of. And while we have had some really interesting and significant discussions at our first few meetings of the winter, I think it was fair to say we didn't make a lot of progress. But this past meeting last week, I think we made substantial progress. And I expect that the first fruit of that labor will make it to this council for consideration and hopeful approval as early as May of this year. And that has to do with specifically with two things. One, with a rezoning, if you will, proposal for the downtown area of our city, which is enormously complicated at this point in time, and most of us believe needlessly so. And so number one step would be to simplify that downtown zoning significantly. But more importantly, I think in the long run, we have kind of zeroed in on our first step toward what is referred to as performance zoning. And if you looked that up or Googled it, you would probably find 100 different explanations, all contradictory as to exactly what that means. but I think an introduction into performance zoning standards in the city of Laconia is going to be on the docket for the planning board's consideration as early as April of this year. And hopefully it will make it to the city council by May for our approval. But basically, my attempt at a layman's explanation for performance zoning is that this proposal would allow within certain areas of the city, focusing on downtown, the Lakeport Square area, and the state school property as a beginning for this is where we are now, would allow the planning board to look at the totality of a planned development, whether it be residential, commercial, or industrial, and decide whether or not that proposed use of a significant piece of property would be in keeping with the overall goals of the city and as laid out by the master plan, irregardless of what specific restrictions are currently in place for that property. Put another way of putting it, right now, looking at the state school as an example, right now the state school property is zoned rural residential. And if the state school property were to be a target, if you will, of this performance zoning concept, someone, in this case the redevelopment authority for that property that the state has set up, could come to us with a proposal that is outside the boundaries of what normally would be allowed in the rural residential zone. And so the planning board would be put in a position of looking at that proposed development in its totality and saying, yes, this is something we want to have in the city of Laconia, and therefore we encourage it and we approve it with conditions and whatnot, irregardless of what the zoning ordinance as written per se has to say, not only about what uses are permitted in that area, but also on on the so-called dimensions table in our zoning ordinance, which deals with everything from height restrictions to green space requirements to lot density issues, setback requirements, all that kind of stuff. So all those kinds of things would be in play. So anyway, a lot more to come on this, but I just wanted to give you a quick heads up that I think we've made unanimous and significant headway during our committee meeting last week towards heading in this direction as far as zoning is concerned. And I'm very excited about it. Any other liaison reports? Citizens' request to comment on current agenda items. We are now at the point where anyone with us tonight who wishes to comment on any agenda item that is pertinent tonight. No? Okay, we're moving right along then. And we are to the city manager's report. Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will try to keep us moving right along here tonight. So you do have two reports in your agenda packet. The first one being the project updates. You know, this is the time of year, late February coming into March, where we're really doing the final planning, if you will, on getting back in the ground as Mother Nature will allow us this spring for everything from streets, drainage, installing irrigations, taking care of beach erosion, wrapping up a couple of the segments of the Riverwalk. I mean, we're working not only with our staff, but in some cases either private contractors who are doing some of the work for us, or also some of the utility companies to make sure we're all on the same schedule going forward. So the one item that we are focusing on right now, dealing specifically with our streets, is we go out to bid on our street paving contract every couple of years, and this is a year that we are out on that. So we have gone out to a first round of requesting qualifications. We've gotten a handful of responses back to that. Staff are in the midst of reviewing those responses, and we'll be asking those that are qualified to be submitting the bids based on unit prices and those types of things. And we will be looking to have a firm selected and ready to roll for April 1st. Weston and his staff have also been working on a preliminary street list. Again, part of that's going to be driven by how much we're able to get into the budget for the next fiscal year. Also, some of that will tie into what some of the unit costs are coming in based on labor and cost of material and petroleum components and all of that to help us hone in on, you know, how many of these streets. So we've got a preliminary list. We're going to kind of hold that back a little bit until we get the numbers on the bids and figure out, you know, which ones look definite and which ones we're going to kind of put on a list that if money and time allows, we'll get to them type of stuff. So we'll looking to release some more information on streets probably around the 1st of April time frame on that. On the economic development report, again, this Laconia, the region, the state continue to be at full employment. Pretty much everybody who's choosing to work is working somewhere at this point. So unemployment continues to be at a very historic low level. We have the first number in the books for the Consumer Price Index, the inflation number. So January is complete, and we have that number coming down a couple of ticks from where we ended up the year, which was right around 2%. The January number came in at 1.6%. So even though we haven't submitted next fiscal year's budget, we're already got the following year of CPI numbers in the works on that. So I'm happy to do a couple of other quick items, then I can take questions. The city fared pretty well today in terms of the windstorm, you know, some trees and branches and stuff, but just before we came live here for 7 o'clock, we only had one power outage, and it was just a handful of residents over in the Fenton Ave area. And as I came through there was an Eversource crew there, hopefully addressing the issue in short order. But statewide, there were about 8,000, 9,000 power outages, at least on the Eversource grid. I don't have the numbers for Unitil or the co-op, but that was about 1.5% of Eversource customers. So a lot of it seems to be down in the southern tier, the Nashua area, the Mass border, heading out towards the Monadnock region. I was asked to give a brief update tonight on the city's LED streetlight conversion project, because we're about 2 years into it right now, and talk a little bit about what our projections were as far as cost and savings, and have they materialized. So the short answer is it's been a very positive project, and yes, we've realized the savings on that. So we had originally estimated the project to net cost to the city be around $300,000. We had some rebate in there, and by the time the final bids came in, it ended up being a little bit less than that. We went out and borrowed $300,000 on a 5-year bond, and the excess money, I think we repurposed it for some of the kiosk purchases down in the Weirs. So we had been paying under the old street lights somewhere, it varied a little bit, somewhere around $225,000 a year is what was budgeted for street lights. We were anticipating getting somewhere about a 45 to a 50% reduction in that. I'm kind of putting the first year aside because different lights came on at different times on the grid and we got credits back and whatever. But for the last couple of years and this year coming up, we've been budgeting somewhere in the $120,000, $125,000, $130,000 a year for street lights, down from the 220 plus figure that we had. So we are realizing a net savings of between $90,000 and $100,000 a year on the electric bills for those. The bond payment that we did again for 5 years is about $66,000 a year with the principal and interest. So we're saving, even use conservative numbers, $90,000. We're only paying $66,000 on the debt service, so we're cash flow $24,000, $25,000 a year from day one on that. It was a net positive cash flow, and again, that's a relatively short time frame for the bond. It's only a 5-year bond, so we have 3 more years to go to pay that off. The lights that we installed, Siemens was the contractor, and all the lights, due to normal wear and tear, not any storm-related stuff, do have a 10-year warranty on those lights. So we know that if we get some outages that are still under warranty, they'll be covered. At some point, we'll probably want to talk about putting a line item in the budget somewhere now and just a little bit at a time to be able to have a light bulb replacement line item, because under the old program, when a light went out, Eversource came and it was Eversource-owned product and their installation. Now the city owns the lights, and the city would either be doing it with staff in some limited cases, but more than likely using a contractor to come in and handle bulbs that are out. So we will have a bit of a cost, but again, we've got a guarantee on these bulbs for the 10 years, other than weather or freak of nature type events to them. So we're in good shape on that, and all in all, a very successful project. And it was actually one that we heard good comments from residents who said they liked the look of the light, and it was softer and better, and it was a nice aesthetic. So it's not often you do a citywide construction project and people call and compliment it, but it was good to hear that. So happy to take questions on LED or anything else tonight.
Questions or comments for the manager? Councilor Hamel.
Back on the LEDs, Scott, what's been the reliability on those? Has there been many replacements of them, or?
I think we had a couple out of one that failed, and then a couple, either just a storm event or something, right? We had 4 or 5, I believe, there at some point that were not, but overall been very positive. And that was kind of the thought with going with Siemens, was a company that's been around for over 100 years, and the bulb that they were offering, had a good track record. There was another local vendor, and I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent, because they were highly recommended and got good results, but they were kind of custom making a light that had components from several different companies, and the concern was if someone went out of business somewhere in that chain and they're using several components that they don't necessarily control, what does that do to us 10, 15, 20 years down the road type of thing. So, and Siemens had just completed, before they did our project, the project in Manchester.
Yep.
And very successful and good results there as well. So I think we're in a good-
Also on the setting aside funds, I think we did talk about that, if I can remember that. But I think we delayed it because we had the 10 years. But probably like the 5th or 4th year before it gets done, we should start setting some of that funds aside.
Yeah, when the bond gets paid off, that'll free up, that debt service of $65,000, and even if we just started putting away $5,000 a year until we got to a certain, point. I mean, I'm not saying they're all going to go in the 11th year or 12th year, but we will be on a larger replacement once we hit a certain point in the lifespan of those lights. So it's probably better if we start realizing that we're going to put away a little bit and plan for it.
Okay, on another subject, recycling. I believe we have to pay, reimburse the the company doing the recycling, if their expenditure, they didn't make their money back on the recycling products. Do you know how we're faring on that from month to month?
Yeah, we had hit a spike back in the late summer, early fall, and we were up around 110 or 115, $125 a ton we were paying to get rid of recyclables, and that was the time that we started the very popular glass is trash phrase of
Oh, yeah.
doing that, of which I still get comments on from people not only in Laconia but around the state. But for that reason, on top of that, when our single-stream recyclables were being sorted, Casella was taking the glass and taking it to the landfill anyway, because there was no other outlet for it in New England. The last entity that was recycling glass for other uses had closed, so it was not cost feasible to do anything with glass other than go in the landfill. So if we put it in our trash stream, we're paying around $84, $85 a ton right now between hauling it from the transfer station and paying the tipping fee in Pennacook. Why would we want to be paying $125 a ton to get rid of glass as recyclable? So at some point, I hope the market changes and there become some options for glass, because I do understand that glass can have a value in certain types of projects as bases for, sidewalks and roads, for landscapers on certain things. Right now, there just isn't a regional entity to collect it and do something productive with it. So we did spike at the $125 range. Most recently, we're back down to in the mid-90s dollar range for the last couple of months.
Cost per ton to pick up the recyclables?
To dispose of the recyclables, we have a contract for a flat cost to pick it up curbside, and then based on that tonnage, it's costing us about $90 a ton to just put $95 a ton to separate it out, and that's the cost beyond whatever value there is for the various components. So cardboard, paper,
So it's costing
aluminum,
us still $90 a ton above what the contract is.
Yes, but it's much closer to the cost of getting rid of solid waste. Now we're at the 85 versus 95, but now you can look at the value of recycling as opposed to, disposing of it in a landfill or an incinerator and having to create new products. So that seems to be much more feasible, whereas with the glass, it was going in the landfill anyway, and we were paying a lot more to get it that way through recycling.
So what is it, how much is it per ton for recycling? 122, you said?
No, it's down to about 95 right now. It's like a commodity, so the market
I know, but
changes
what is
monthly.
our contract with them? What is it per ton?
We pay the difference. We have a flat rate to pick it up curbside every other week. And then beyond there, if they don't break even on the commodity value, we pick up the cost. And right now, it's costing us an extra $90 a ton to
But I
pick
mean,
it up.
what I'm trying to do is, what's the total cost with that $90 per ton?
So net,
The
it's,
the flat rate for well, I don't know if I have it broken down. Do you know what our flat rate is for the curbside?
Curbside recycling's around 15,000 a month.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was around 170 or 180,000, so it's about, call it 180,000 for the truck to go every other week and pick up the material, and then we're paying $95 a ton to dispose of recyclables right now.
so net, we're in a negative position with respect to recyclables as opposed to positive for.
Absolutely, and that can change, but right now, it's, part of that was driven, as you've heard Wes and I say, from the conditions in China, where China stopped importing all recyclables. First of all, they got very stringent on what standards they would accept them in, and level of purity and not lack of contamination, and then they stopped altogether, so the market just bottomed out.
So the transportation and tipping fee, what does that come to? Is that, what is that at now?
On the solid waste side. So it's a total of around $85, maybe $15 or $16 is the transportation from Laconia to Pennacook, and the other
So about
$68,
$85 for
$69, yeah, about $85. Once it gets to the,
We're paying $90 a month just in excess.
well, we're paying $85 a ton to get rid of trash, and we're paying a little over $90 a ton to get rid of recyclable. But
Plus the contract.
well, there's a contract to pick it up on our curbside too, so there's that cost, and that's probably double because they're picking up solid waste curbside every week, and the recyclable is only every other week. But at least here you can justify that you are reusing all of these tons of the plastics and the metals and the paper. They're all getting reused, whereas the glass was being thrown away anyway. So yes, we're paying a couple dollars more a ton for recyclables, but there's value in that sustainability and reusing them as opposed to landfilling them.
How about the cardboard compactor at Messer Street? Is
Yep.
that working out?
That is working out pretty decently. We've got that caged area there where people can flatten true corrugated cardboard. It's not shoe boxes and it's not paperboard cereal boxes, but true corrugated. They can flatten it out, slide it into the slots at any time, and when that bin fills up, our staff goes over and uses the compactor that we've got right next to it and compacts that. That way we know that the product is clean and it's pure and it's going to have value. And how many times have we emptied? We emptied 2, and it's been since November?
First empty was in December.
Okay, so we started accepting cardboard there probably in late November, 1st of December, and we've emptied it twice. And do we know how many tons?
I want to say about 7 to 9. I
To-
can't remember.
Total or per load? Total, okay. And again, so that's 7 to 9 tons that we're breaking even on because we have to rent the compactor, sit there on the pad and be there, but we're getting value for that cardboard versus having it go into the single stream and us paying $90 a ton to get rid of it. So it's not a huge number, but I hope that the popularity picks up and people realize they can just flatten cardboard and stick it in the corner of their garage or in the shed or wherever, and they can drive by any time of day and slide it in the slot.
Is that machine banded?
It doesn't ban it. Somebody comes, I think, and picks it up and takes it off as a roll-off, and they take the whole dumpster away.
Oh, they take the whole dumpster. Is that
Right.
the people that's doing our recycling now that take it?
It's a Casella product. Casella's handling it, right? Yeah. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So it's not part of any of our contracts, but as we call them to come in and pick it up, it's on a per haul basis. So we only pay them when it's full and ready to go.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
You're welcome.
Do you have something, Counselor Littman?
I'm going to save it for another night.
Sorry?
I'm going to save it for another night.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for the manager? Okay, we are on to new business. Call your attention to page 36 of your packet, a request to change the speed limit on Daisy Gardner Road and Layton Avenue North on the, for those of you who are not familiar with that in our audience, with that is the upper east shore of Lake Winnisquam we're talking about here. So Counselor, sorry, Mr. Myers, you want to address that, or who's going to?
I think if you get some background, Wes Anderson can certainly handle specifics. I mean,
We
this
have
is
one
looking.
resident asking for this, is that my understanding?
Want to come speak to that, Wes?
We had one resident request it because he's seeing a lot more walkers on the road during the spring, summer, and fall, and during the winter when the weather is. And there's really no shoulder of the road for them to walk on, so they're walking on the street. And he just wanted to make it a little bit safer for them to walk on by lowering the speed limit.
And 30 miles an hour is as low as we could go.
We could go as low as 25. Anything underneath that is, you really can't go that slow on that type of road.
Any questions from the council? Okay, thank you. Any thoughts, observations before we get to making a
I'd like to
motion?
hear from a lot more residents than just one, I think.
How many houses are on that street? Not all that many.
There's a lot.
50 maybe, both sides of the road?
Approximately 50.
50. So what's the will of the council here?
I think we have it out there, and if we don't get any further comment from the residents in that area, then I think one is maybe not enough to change it, as Councilor Hamill's suggesting.
Wait till the next meeting to
Yeah.
act on it if we haven't heard no comments.
Right.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
I'm suggesting that we have the recommendation. We've heard from one individual. Let's leave it out there till the next meeting and see if we get any other feedback.
All right, so you'd like a motion to table?
Yes, till the next meeting.
Okay, motion to table from Counselor Littman, seconded by Counselor Hamel. All those in favor of tabling, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. So that will be carried under unfinished business on our next agenda. Next up is a request from the clerk to set polling hours for September and November municipal elections this year for 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Motion to be in order to approve the polling hours for the municipal primary and general elections being held on September 10 and November 12, 2019, from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.
How does that compare to,
I thought it was 7 to 7.
7 to 7.
7 to 7 for state elections.
It's a
and
city
always-
election
It's
only.
always been a city election only. It's been 8 to 6.
Would someone care to make that motion?
I will.
Counselor Haynes, is there a second? Counselor Cheney seconds that motion. Discussion. Everyone looks very pensive here. Would the clerk like to address why we have shorter election hours for,
Less people come, there's not a huge turnout.
yeah, usually around 15-20% at most.
Right.
I guess the only thing in terms of, for people who work out of town, make it hard for them to get there.
I think it does list in one of our ordinances that that shall be the hours for that, so you could certainly amend it and do otherwise, but it's not something that just
Why are
came
we
about.
setting
as
it
soon
if
as-
the ordinance is setting it?
I think just to formalize it.
Oh.
In case there's any alternative thoughts on amending the hours to something different.
Counselor Haynes.
Mr. Mayor, it's very confusing, and I fully support, the 8 to 6. The problem we have is that, the federal is 7 to 7, and then for some reason, City of Manchester opens at 6 o'clock in the morning. So when you're trying to set up, there are people there at 6:30 saying, well, Manchester's open at 6 o'clock. So, I mean,
People who work out of town, 8 o'clock, you can't do it, and 6 o'clock, you might not make it back. But I understand we hold 6 different locations for voting. I think we just need to promote the availability of absentee ballots and the like.
I agree. Yep.
So we would literally have to change the ordinance.
You could just amend the hours for this year and use it as a trial and see how many people come in between 6 and 7 or between 7 and 8 in the morning if you wanted to do it without changing the ordinance.
Clerk is shaking her head. For those who can't see her.
But I agree, absentee ballots are an option, and we certainly can promote that more heavily.
Any further discussion? Anyone want to make an amendment? All right, I'm going to call for a vote then. All those in favor of Counselor Haynes' motion, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. And a sigh of relief from the clerk is audible. Okay, correspondence from Atlantic Broadband. That packet starts on page 38. The actual letter is on page 39. I'll recognize again Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think this comes as any surprise. A similar letter was received by the town of Guilford, and their select board acted upon it. I think I'd kind of given you a heads up that it was likely that we would receive a similar type of a letter, as generally I've stated publicly, and again, not to release any of our attorney-client privilege, but generally speaking, we knew going into it from our attorney, Kate Miller, that no 2 franchise agreements that are negotiated at different times are ever going to be 100% identical, nor should they be, because there's certain duplicative type of items that the city wouldn't benefit from having 2 iNets, which are the information networks between the buildings, or to have, multiple cable drops into a building where you've only got 1 TV available type of thing. So she is, as I've said, is very comfortable that while these franchise agreements are not identical, it does not make one more favorable and one more burdensome, in her professional opinion. And Kate and her firm, Donahue, Tucker, Chiandella, are the recognized telecommunication franchise agreement leaders in the state and the municipal world. So certainly take her at her word, and she feels that they are Again, no more favorable or more burdensome one over the other, even though they're not identical.
So how does it get adjudicated?
There could be, depending on where the council went with this tonight, obviously if you agreed to what they stated in the letter, then we would go ahead and just draft an amended agreement. If you indicated that you did not agree with what's there and you felt that the document as it stands is what I've said, no more or less favorable, then we would send them a letter stating that, and then kind of the ball would be in their court. Whether they accept that, whether they come back and want to counter with something different than what's before you, we would have to wait and see that. I mean, ultimately, they could bring it to a legal system and bring it to court, and you probably would have a judge look at the agreements and make a determination as to whether one was more favorable or not.
Questions?
I get more of a statement. I guess I felt like it's pretty sizable credit taken for some things that have been fully depreciated, if you will, or significantly depreciated. I think there's the net that connects city buildings
The
together.
iNet.
They're looking to INET. They're looking to charge us, if I'm understanding, $23,000 a year for that. It's, I think, outrageous. But so I guess that's my one man's opinion on the council here, that we shouldn't accept the letter, and I propose we put it back to council to negotiate something that's more reasonable than that.
Questions? Okay.
I do have one quick question. What is Guilford's thought on it? Have you talked to them at all?
I can't speak to it verbatim, but the Guilford Board of Selectmen took this item up either last Thursday or 2 Thursdays ago during their public meeting, and my understanding is that they rejected similar correspondence from Atlantic Broadband to amend their agreement, and stated something along the lines of they felt that the agreements were comparable in their entirety.
Okay.
Motion be in order to authorize the city manager to respond to the letter received from Atlantic Broadband declining to grant the relief requested on the grounds that the burdens and favors of the two franchise agreements currently in effect are roughly compatible. Someone care to make that motion? Counselor Cheney, is there a second? I'll second. Counselor Haynes seconds that motion. Discussion. Counselor Lippman.
I think the motion is useful but not sufficient.
All right, would you like to amend it?
I think basically we need to authorize the manager to work with council to negotiate or litigate whatever to get us a fair offer.
I'm fine with that amendment. I think the original would imply that, but certainly outlining it,
I'd like to make it concrete.
fine.
I'm sorry?
I would like to make it concrete that we're not rejecting it, we're intending to either
All right,
negotiate it.
here's what's on the
or-
table.
yes.
Could you offer an amendment to that, or?
Sure. I'm just going to decline to grant the relief requested on the grounds that the burdens and favors of the two franchise agreements are roughly comparable, and authorize, this is the addition, and authorize the manager to
Further authorize.
further authorize the manager and our expert counsel to negotiate or litigate a fair agreement to the city.
All right, who made the motion originally?
I
You
did.
did, do you accept that as a friendly
I do.
amendment? And you seconded, do you accept
do.
that as a friendly amendment?
Yes.
All right, so we're gonna consider the motion now. You have the correct
Yeah.
total language? All right. So that motion remains made by
Counselor Cheney.
Counselor Cheney and seconded by Counselor Haynes with the friendly amendment.
So just a brief comment on that. I believe the underlying message from legal counsel and myself is what we have already signed is a fair agreement in comparison to what we just did with Comcast.
Well, obviously, we have a dispute by basis of the letter, and somehow it's going to have to be resolved. Just saying, we don't think we agree with your number isn't probably going to based on what you said.
I think that's why the original motion the mayor brought forward was to say, we think they are fair agreements as they stand. We reject your request for relief and see what response we get from them, if any.
So I think the motion now authorizes you to keep going,
If
depending
we
on what
receive a
their.
response, yes.
Get it done without having to come back.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 4 votes yes, motion carries unanimously. All right, on to unfinished business. We have that one resolution to take care of tonight, 3 different motions. This is with regard to Resolution 2 and the exotic aquatic plant grant. First motion would be to, in order, would be to waive the reading of resolution number 2 in its entirety and to read by title only, which is on page 43. Can I have that motion, please? Counselor Littman makes a motion, Counselor Hamel seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor of reading by title only, please raise a hand. We have 4 votes in affirmative, that motion carries. Okay, next up is to move, motion be in order to move second reading of Resolution 2 relative to authorizing the city manager to sign all necessary documents regarding the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Sciences aquatic exotic. I knew I was going to screw it up sooner or later.
We're doing so well.
Exotic aquatic plan grant in the amount of $14,618. Someone make that motion, please. Counselor Haynes, seconded by Counselor Littman. Any discussion? All those in favor of second reading, please raise a hand. 4 votes in affirmative, that motion carries. And finally, a motion be in order to approve Resolution 2 relative to authorizing the city manager to sign all necessary documents. I get to say this one more time, regarding the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Exotic Aquatic Plant Grant in the amount of $14,618. Someone care to make that motion, please? Counselor Haynes, seconded by Counselor Hamel. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 4 votes in affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. Council comments? Anyone tonight? Counselor, well, good.
Not wanting to disappoint.
Counselor Cheney, thank you.
I've been in the city a long time, and it is my recollection that every time it snowed, a day or so later, Public Works was on Main Street and Pleasant Street and some of the other streets picking up the snow, either snow blowing it into a truck and hauling it off. I know it's hard now because you can't put it in the river anymore and whatever, but driving up Main Street is like driving up a slalom course, because if there's a big pickup pulled in or whatever and they don't push the snowbank, they stick out so far that if you look at the tracks in the road, you see people up through Main Street and down through Pleasant Street. So I'd like to ask that we renew our efforts to clean up Main Street. I haven't seen it cleaned this year. I noted that the sidewalk beside Bloom's, which I would be the first to admit is unusually small, nevertheless has not been cleaned up at all this year. Or at least I haven't seen it cleaned up yet this year.
Talking about Hanover Street?
Yes, I think, yes. And we used to do this in Lakeport, cleaning up the edge of the street and hauling the snow off. And I just think in the midst of discussing the Colonial and refurbishing or improving the downtown, to leave that snow on the sidewalks and the streets is not helpful. So I don't know how to address that. I don't know what the format is to suggest we need to do something different, but I wanted to bring it to the council's attention that I think it's a significant issue. I would also point out, and I did show some of the councilors, besides the old sundial shop, what used to be the sundial shop, there's a 10-foot pile of snow there, which, by the way, is partially touching the building. If we
In the city parking lot?
Yes. If we damage the building, it's going to be our responsibility. So and the other thing was, if you look down by the bicycle shop, On the one side, the crosswalk is dug out. It's a skating rink, but it's dug out. But as you look across the street, the other side wasn't cleared. So you get over there, and if you want, you can hop the snowbank, but if you're 75 years old, that's not quite so easy as it might have been a few years ago. I just think we need to pay more attention to the downtown, the condition of the downtown after snowstorms. That's my comment.
Okay, I would, before we give everyone else an opportunity for a council comment on whatever matters of concern to them, I brought this same issue to the attention of the council a couple months ago, I think, or a month ago. That I was commenting on the sidewalk between the Antique Center and the former Sundial Shop building. We gotta find a new name for that building. I don't know what we're calling it, but anyway, I addressed it at that point in time that we had several days after that, whatever storm that was, we had a crosswalk to nowhere because you couldn't get up onto the sidewalk on either side of the street at that point in time for the snowbanks that were still present. And I believe the Public Works Director answered my question at that time, but I'm suggesting tonight, perhaps to the city manager, that maybe on a future agenda here in the not too distant future, we could get a briefing on what the sequence of clearing is now, what the protocol is.
Sure.
And rather than getting into it tonight, and doesn't have to be a long presentation, but what the protocol is, and if that has changed at all in recent years, and if so, why?
Yep. We can schedule that in short order, yes.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else for council comments? Councilor Hamel.
Just a quick one. I want to thank all the department heads, fire, police, public works, Parks and Rec, city manager, and the mayor for joining me at Woodland Heights School a couple Fridays ago to honor Ben Phillips with his photograph of the Key Exchange at Christmas Village. Had quite an assembly there. There's about 400 kids that participated, and all the teachers, and it was nice to see all the department heads present. I think Ben was very surprised, and from what I hear, they're still calling him Mayor Ben. So congratulations to Ben for that.
That was great, and he got his picture on the front page of the paper.
He did, the whole front
It
page.
was great all the way around. That was very enjoyable, and I too appreciate all the city officials who showed up for that. It was great to see. Public Works Director was there, the fire chief was there, the police chief was there. We were well represented in front of all the students there to honor him in front of all the students at the school. It was quite impressive, and I'm sure deeply appreciated by Ben, so thank you. Anyone else, council comments? We do have a need tonight for a brief non-public session. And I'm going to ask for a motion. I will advise those of you who are with us tonight that council, I do not anticipate the council will take any action at the end of this. So we'll briefly come back into public session simply to adjourn at the end of the non-public. But motion be in order, please, to enter non-public session under 91A for consideration of the acquisition, sale, or lease of real or personal property, which, if discussed in public, would likely benefit a party or parties whose interests are adverse to those of the general community. Can I have a motion to that effect, please? Councilor Cheney, seconded by Councilor Lippman. Any discussion? All right, we need a roll call vote on this, Madam Clerk.
Counselor Bounds. Sorry, Cheney. Go ahead of myself.
Yes.
Counselor Littman.
Yes.
Counselor Haynes.
Yes.
Counselor Hamel.
Yes.
Mayor England.
Yes. All right, we are in non-public session.
Almost.